Freedom and censorship can't exist in the same world. And that's true whether it's the government or private corporations who do the censoring. Hi, I'm Ron Coleman, and welcome to the ColemanNation podcast. It's a show where I sit down with guests to discuss the future of free expression and thought in our interconnected world. Here we will focus on issues involving social media, cancel culture, and free expression that everybody who cares about ideas or freedom should be wrestling with. Well, shortly before we went on this recording thingy that we do with recording the talking, my producer, Jeremy Corr, the lovely and talented Jeremy Corr, said, Ron, do you think you got a favorite podcast? And I'm bad at this. I'm not even sure I've got a favorite ice cream because I'm so content with life. But I have got a feeling I'm about to do my favorite podcast. Our guest is Michael Malice, my friend, my ideological adversary in many respects, and my ideological ally in many more, and the hardest working man in show business. Michael Malice, thank you for coming onto the ColemanNation podcast.
I always do like to think of myself as an ideological ally.
I once walked down one of those ideological alleys. Actually, it was pretty close to where your studio is located. And when I came out, I identified as a completely different kind of man.
I did, and then I watched my parents get shot, so I decided to dress like a bat.
Boy, we are moving fast here. We are moving fast. Michael Malice, first of all, you sent me this. No, you didn't send it to me. I had to buy it because I had to read it. Michael Malice just put out a book, which he didn't write. Which is unusual because you've put out so many books that you did write that your name wasn't on.
No, my name's on all my books.
Didn't you work as a ghostwriter?
Co-author. My name's on the covers, baby.
So be that as it may, I want you to tell the listeners about the book. Michael Malice put out a collection of essays, the Anarchist Handbook, about how we became so twisted and demented and hateful of humanity, and yet so trusting in their ability to govern themselves, probably because he's wiry and I bet you run pretty fast, Michael.
Cardio kills gains. No, God, no.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you don't want to do cardio to that level. No. I would get out of breath very quickly. It's all about vanity, not about health.
Oh, okay. Therefore, you're in favor of anarchy. Well, I'm reading this book because there was a reason I had to read this book. And
well, we can get into your involvement. I mean, I guess.
Oh, we can, I guess.
Sure.
So Michael asked me to be the voice of one of his chosen essays. It's a series of essays of the predominant voices of anarchy going back a couple hundred years of the philosophy of anarchy.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating. And, what I found interesting was your blurb on the book, which was actually taken from your introduction. I mean, I found a lot of it fascinating, including the fact that I had to talk for 2 hours.
You chose to talk for 2 hours. Anarchism is voluntary. A good lawyer would have got it done in 90 minutes.
A good lawyer wouldn't have done it for free, okay?
There you go.
So much less bought the freaking book. So
I'll send you a hardcover. We're doing.
Oh, now we're talking.
We're doing signed, numbered hardcovers, and you're absolutely getting one for free. And my understanding is we're getting the quote right now. I think we're going to have a lenticular cover. And for those who don't know what a lenticular cover is, it's one of those 3D covers that when you move it, the picture moves.
And it will be a picture of me, Ron Coleman. So that's an extra bonus. What Michael says in the introduction, and which he uses for the word by the book, is this: freedom. This is all about freedom. Michael, here we are in something that is definitely not a free moment in American history. Do you think we've ever been less free since the founding of the Republic in 1776 than we are now?
Oh, certainly. During World War I, during World War II, the Civil War,
Because of the degree of censorship?
No, because I mean, if you're being drafted, you can't really, being forced to fight for the state, you're not free.
So Vietnam too, then.
But Vietnam wasn't as pervasive of a draft because, for example, World War I, World War II, not only was everyone were so many people drafted, although largely voluntary in World War II to fight, but everyone left at home was basically working for the war effort. And you had a complete kind of quasi-totalitarian system, which you can very easily argue, and I think persuasively, that this was necessary, for these situations. But you can't really make the case that when virtually 100% of the economy and this rationing is being planned by Washington, that you're free. And certainly you were less free then than you are now.
Is a state of war, declared war, an appropriate occasion then for the suspension of freedom?
No, there are no appropriate occasions for the suspension of freedom.
Let us now step down to peacetime.
Okay.
Would you say, I mean, now before the 14th Amendment incorporated the constitutional rights of the liberties of the Bill of Rights to apply to the states,
yeah,
you had laws in all the states, just about all of them, probably not New York, and the Jews weren't even in charge then yet, but a lot of states that prohibited people from blasphemy, holding public office if they weren't Protestants, prohibiting public office to Catholics, all kinds of defamation laws that were much more Platon friendly than the world we live in now. I'm not, you're not, I don't want to put you on the spot. You're not the all being of American history. But would you say, abstracting from times of war, that before the 14th Amendment, we were less free than we are now, or more free than we are now in terms of let's just focus on free expression.
So there's a complete fallacy, and obviously I'll defer to your knowledge of the legal history gladly, and I'm sure whatever you're saying I would defer to and as accurate. There's a complete myth. So if you look at the corporate media, we are presented with basically a floating timeline. There's a show in Canada called Degrassi. It's a teenage high school drama. And they basically have this floating timeline where, like, last season, which may have aired 2 years ago, was like 3 months ago of whatever current episode is happening. And it just and the characters end up aging because the actors age. It's a very weird situation. If you look at the corporate media, what is presented as our history is basically a floating timeline. And we only remember like 20 years ago, and everything before that is kind of a fog. It is a complete ahistoric myth that America has had a strong tradition of anything close to a free speech situation. One of the easiest examples is Margaret Sanger, who is a current, villain for many people who are conservatives, who created Planned Parenthood, invented the term birth control to fight abortion, which something pro-life and pro-choice people don't want to talk about. She got her start because it was a felony for doctors to privately discuss birth control with their clients. This is something, because that was regarded as pornography. This is something we can't even wrap our heads around. Moses Harman, I discussed this in a previous book of mine, The New Right, had a newsletter, and in it he had a letter that he published from a doctor discussing a patient he had who was a woman who had recently had childbirth and was raped by her husband. And by printing this letter, he was sentenced to hard labor. So we have a very long history in this country, not even forgetting wartime censorship, as you know perfectly well, Ron, and many people might know as well. John Adams was president. The ink wasn't even dry in the Constitution when they passed the Sedition Act,
right,
which made it a felony to criticize the government, and people went to jail. This is something, we can't even wrap our heads around in contemporary times, because the mantra always is, well, the one thing the founding fathers wanted to preserve under free speech was political speech. That's the first thing they censored. And this was done under the auspice of the Constitution. So I completely...
And during the lives of the founding fathers, they were there. Oh,
yes, they were all there, and some of them didn't like it. Some of them, did like it, but they had the numbers to do it. So this claim that, historically we've been... I think freedom is kind of like a sine wave. you're going to have greater amounts of freedom at certain times, and it's going to be lessened in other areas of free speech. But it's not been this continuous, arrow just going more and more and more. It's been up and down all over the place, and with the approval of the populace often.
And that's a fantastic point. You use the metaphor of a sine wave. We often talk about the pendulum swinging in one direction or the other. Now, the problem here is that deciding what the axes are here, what are the pendulums that are swinging, is a little bit confusing, because we're living in an era of intense, non-governmental, hold the thought, non-governmental censorship of expression, which in and of itself is probably relatively unparalleled, even though for all of American history, you could get fired for opening your mouth. And I think actually most people who have a business would want to be able to fire someone who publicly advocated something that you as the business owner considered to be terrible or embarrassing.
For sure.
And I sometimes have to remind conservatives that I was been astonished at how people have been struck by this as if it hadn't occurred to them before. Wouldn't you, my fellow right-wing fascist, want to be able to fire someone for being a supporter of Antifa? Isn't that something that you want the right? You want to retain the right to do? Well, yeah, I guess so. Well, then it's a two-way street.
I am much more of an advocate of freedom of association than I am freedom of speech. I think freedom of speech is one of these very poorly conceived and defined terms that mean different things to different people. I do not ever call myself a free speech advocate because of this. And I agree with you completely. If I am running a business, then I have the right to fire anyone who is under my employment at any time, as do they have the right to quit at any time, subject to the contract which they and I, or they and their representatives, or my representatives, have mutually agreed to upfront. I also think that something doesn't have to be in a contract to be morally binding. For example, unless your boss is a real jerk, or you got some, really amazing job offer. This happened to me once. You give 2 weeks notice. It's just, I think people underestimate maybe, and I would be curious to hear the lawyer's perspective on this. People underestimate how much social principles are enforced socially as opposed to the state. Tipping your waiters, and just another great example. It's not really the law, but there's really approbation if you decide to just kind of stiff that person.
Well, that's social fabric. That's the social fabric, and it's something that I think a lot of libertarians accept as a given, but probably don't pay as much attention to as you just did. It's the kind of thing that I'm so glad you brought up that point. I want to come back to it in a second, because I've got, I think, frankly, a brilliant follow-up on it. But on the pendulum point, I often have said that if indeed there's a swing back and forth, first of all, again, we're looking at a different arc. Here we're talking about a private censorship arc. And libertarians also, I think, have a problem acknowledging that you don't have to be a government, which, we don't need those stinking badges, to be every bit as oppressive and liberty depriving as the most authoritarian government imaginable.
I disagree with that completely. I don't think anything Mark Zuckerberg or Jack Dorsey can do is comparable to Stalin or Hitler.
Stalin or Hitler? Correct.
You just said the most oppressive government imaginable. I don't.
In terms of expression.
It's not even close. Mark Zuckerberg can't cause harm to my person. He can't starve me. If I'm kicked off Facebook, for you to compare that to the most oppressive government imaginable, I can't even wrap my head around this analogy.
You're right. It's not the most oppressive government analogy. Imaginable. You cannot say what I just said as extremely as I just said it. I can say that it is definitely a form of repression.
And it's a cost. It's an enormous cost. So if you have a business person and you are deprived of your opportunity to sell your wares on, let's say, eBay
Bingo.
or use PayPal. I think the more
Right.
nefarious one that you and I should be focusing on, and people who are listening to this, is it Mark Zuckerberg or Jack Dorsey, where there's, you know, alternatives already trying to kind of bubbling up. We're seeing with BitChute and YouTube, for example. The real concern are the banks and the credit card processor.
Yes, absolutely.
If I'm kicked off of Facebook, it might suck, but there's really, you know, I could have my own website, I could have my own Instagram. These are not ideal, to be fair, and this is not something I'm hand waving away. It's not a concern. They need to be addressed and acknowledged, and like, all right, what are you guys doing here? You don't get to pick and choose winners and then get government protection and claim that you're just a publisher. But if I can't get payment from Visa or MasterCard or whatever, I'm really SOL. And I don't think people understand to what extent they are willing currently to put their finger on the scale. And let me give you a brief example. I am looking right now at a pen holder I bought. The guy who I bought this pen holder from makes, I don't even know what they're called, like the things you attach to gun handles. And so they're decorative, right? Because he doesn't even sell guns, because he sells things that are used as purely cosmetic accessories.
It's like the gun equivalent of operating a head shop.
Yeah, right, exactly. Because of that, he can't use Visa, MasterCard. I had to pay him with either, I don't remember what it was, a check or PayPal. That, rather than, because it's a big difference between I can't, you know, opine on the president as opposed to I can't pay my rent. I mean, if these are the two choices.
Oh, yeah. You're 100% right. But although what I would say to you, having been deep into these cases, is that the distinction might be more conceptual than real, because they're working hand in glove, and it, you know, it is there's a cascade effect, as I've called it, where once you become a persona non grata on one or more major platforms, that in and of itself becomes a rationale to ban you from other ones, including payment platforms. That is, you know, you're bringing that up. That was where I was going, but that's really the point, is that, yeah, if you can't, I mean, you know, Laura Loomer, love her or hate her, and I know a lot of people I know feel one way or the other about her. A lot more people love her than many of the people who hate her would like to believe. She can't earn a living doing anything now. She is untouchable. And all she ever did was arguably act kind of like a lunatic.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think Laura's a good example, because there's things that she did where I can understand why they wouldn't want her around. So this is going to be a gray area in many cases. But just broadly speaking, the reason I brought up the credit card processors is so much of the volume of discourse, both in Washington and on social media, is about, you know, what they call big tech censorship, and the percentage that's focused on the real villains here, Visa, MasterCard, who are just, these are also villains that ostensibly people on the left, even Elizabeth Warren, understands these are not the good guys. Kamala Harris in her book discusses how these are not the good guys. I think this in many ways focusing on Zuckerberg is a bit of missing, and I'm not saying you are personally, but I think people are missing the bigger picture, because again, if you go, let's suppose you're locked out of Facebook for a month, just innocently, you forget your password or whatever, something like that. Okay, fine. If you're locked out of your store and where you're selling things, that, I mean, which one of those is much more of an emergency? It's pretty clear to me.
Although again, Facebook has become a major economic, you know, and you and I sell words and ideas, so it's a little harder for us, unless we get into it, to appreciate that.
Yeah. Now,
I want to I mean that's a fantastic point, and given our lack of, you know, an infinite amount of time, I want to move from it. But your point is extremely well taken. What was it again that I said, though, that I wanted to pick up on? Something else that you said. Do you remember? Did anyone remember? Any of my morning zoo guys remember that hang around with me and laugh at all my jokes? Do you? I assume you have one of those, Michael. I know every time I've been to your place, you have a bunch of guys who are in charge of reminding you of things. And
oh yeah, but I don't ask them for their input.
I don't have anyone, of course, obviously.
And if I mention them on the air, they have to bleep out their names because they don't matter.
They don't matter.
They don't. And I even make them put a little symbol over my mouth so you can't even see what my mouth is saying. I'm not kidding. I do it all, baby.
You know why? That is the perfect rent seeking. It's just
Yes, sir.
You are the human embodiment of Cose's theorem. I love it.
Yeah, I'm the living anchovy subsidy.
Well, I'll tell you something. I noticed on Twitter that somebody was reporting about my firm's website on behalf of Rogan O'Handley, DC Drano on Instagram, really super duper important lawsuit against Twitter, in which direct government action is not only implicated, but explicitly demonstrated in the pleadings that the state of California, along with the connivance of another 22 other states through the National Association of Attorneys General, all Democrats, told Twitter to ban him. So now we're talking about plain old state censorship. And of course it has been essential. So we gave an exclusive to Tucker Carlson, which is an extremely reasonable thing to do.
Sure.
But that combined with the new form of true media censorship, which is to ignore stories that cut against the narrative, resulted in really a blackout on this lawsuit. Finally, one of these newer, and I don't want to pick a fight with the guy, so I'm not going to say the name. I've already picked a fight, but I want to pick a bigger fight. But one of these newer conservative websites, news websites, came out with a story a couple of days later. Conservative man sues Twitter. This is like the new Florida man.
Yeah.
But we're talking about not a conservative man. We're talking about a guy with 2 million followers on Instagram. He literally makes a living in a way that few of us could ever dream to from social media. And it was conservative, man. Why am I bringing this up? Because of the rent seeking. And as I thought about it, I realized they're not going to even give this guy, or as we say in Yiddish, they're not even going to vergin him. They're not even going to grant him the publicity of using his name in the head unless and until they've got something going with him.
Well, can I speak to that? Because
Please do.
First of all, I would love to have you on my show in sometime next couple of weeks few weeks to discuss this case.
Absolutely.
And where things are moving. Because
anything rather than work.
No, but I mean, you joke, but
I'm not joking.
Okay, no. But Ron, in all seriousness, there's such a profound disconnect between, how like what was his name? Who was the guy that Obama nominated to the Supreme Court? That was Merrick Garland.
Yeah.
The day Obama nominates Merrick Garland and basically Mitch McConnell says, we're not going to have hearings this year, we're going to have the election, and everyone on Twitter instantly becomes a Supreme Court expert the next day.
Right.
The same thing. It's like there's a lawsuit and everyone is a First Amendment attorney. You are a First Amendment attorney. So rather than having all the noise on the internet, I would much rather talk to someone who's in the fray and can actually give us the data about how this actually works and where I think it's going and so on and so forth. So I think that's very, very germane. But what specifically to that headline, what people are increasingly understanding is that corporate media is not there to inform, that they're there to train their audience. And they have a technique, which I have a running thread on Twitter about, which I dubbed as an aside. So how it works is whenever how people read plays, a lot of times in a play, before the play even starts, there's a page in the book that has the cast of characters and has a one sentence fragment or sentence descriptor of who this is. Mercurio, Romeo's friend who, gets a lot of action, for example, right? So what they do though, is when they bring a character onto the screen, onto the stage, they immediately have a descriptor so the audience knows whether this is friend or foe. And one egregious example of this was Joe Rogan, for example. So Joe Rogan, if you asked someone, hey, who's Joe Rogan? You would say podcast host. You might say MMA guy. You might say the Fear Factor guy. You might say comedian. Most successful podcaster. The descriptors are that are objective are infinite.
Right.
The article would say Joe Rogan, who has a history of getting in trouble for homophobic and transphobic jokes, comma,
Jesus
you laugh. You laugh because it's so heavy-handed.
Right. But they're
But
doing
it's
that.
very,
Sure.
yeah, it's very clear that from this reporter's perspective, what is most important to the reader when it comes to perceiving this character. And what's even funnier is they didn't even say homophobic and transphobic comments. If I'm remembering this correctly, they specifically said this guy tells inappropriate jokes, and that's what matters about this person. So once you notice that this is what they do, you can't unsee it. And this is another good example. This isn't about someone whose livelihood is possibly taken away. The important thing is to realize he's a member of the conservative tribe. And for many people in that audience, I don't need to hear anything else. Oh, a conservative's having a headache? Good. Goodbye. And that's the end of the thinking on the matter. So these techniques are very pervasive, but I don't think they're very sophisticated. Correct. And once they're pointed out, people just like you just laugh. It's like who are you trying to get over here? It's like when you come home and there's a cookie jar on the floor and all the cookies are everywhere and the kid has chocolate over their face. It's like, really? Like, do I need to say anything? It's just like everyone knows what's going on here.
So perfect, because what you've just now done, besides invite me onto your show, which is the main thing, is, because we have so much fun, is remind me precisely of the other point that I wanted to get back to, which is, do we learn? And is this, in other words, will the sine curve, there's often this sense of it's the end of days. We'll never get out of this one alive.
Right.
And when I asked Jack Posobiec, is there any hope? And he said, sure, listen, I mean, guess what? 70 million people at least did vote for Donald Trump. And the mission of the mainstream media has been to make that number zero, literally.
Why are you calling them mainstream? Do you really think their ideology is mainstream?
Oh no, listen. Corporate media. I know we've been. It's just that in and of itself is a legacy terminology. You're 100% right. We're going to call them corporate media, and I have to admit, you and I had a little bit of a showdown on Twitter, and you demonstrated that you used the term several months before I did of corporate media, and I had to what's the term again?
Get disbarred.
Well, that's so you're pretty excited about this Rudy Giuliani stuff. I think it's time that people who foster false narratives should lose their ability to be licensed for professions.
Is that what happened with him? He got disbarred?
His license was suspended.
Oh.
Today.
Wow. I did not know that.
Because and you have to read this. I mean, it's phenomenal, because they said he made false statements. There was no possible way this tribunal can be in a position of knowing that the statements were false.
Wow.
It's just, I mean, we're living it. All right. So this goes now back onto the scale of, gosh, is there a way out of this? And I still think the answer is yes. And to me, one of the most encouraging things that happened, and I have to admit, I kind of lost the track. I kind of lost the thread of how it ended, if it ended at all, was the GameStop moment of a couple months ago, where all of a sudden there was like this entire space that had not yet been filled up by the state, even in this highly regulated financial sector. And it was this really, and believe me, I had no money involved. I don't have any money. My money goes to paying yeshiva tuition. But it was as if there was some light being let into the system. Do you think, Bitcoin is an example. I mean, apparently Bitcoin scares the hell out of the Chinese. Bitcoin and Michael Malice scare the hell out of the Chinese.
Well, I would hope more the North Koreans are scared of me, because that's who my guns are set for, as you know. My upcoming book, which hopefully will be out by the end of the year, is called The White Pill, and it's about the victory of good over evil. And I am absolutely,
oh my gosh, I asked exactly the right question.
Yeah, I am absolutely, I don't understand, just historically speaking, is there a better symbol of can I curse?
Yes, this is a podcast.
Yeah. Is there any, well, no, sometimes they're rated, so it gets weird, like YouTube. Yeah.
Yeah, good, fair enough, yeah.
is there any better symbol of an empire in decline than a president who's literally shitting his pants behind the Resolute desk? I mean, this claim that people like, whatever the latest New York Times apparatchik, Kamala Harris and Joe Biden are going to be tougher adversaries than John Dewey, Woodrow Wilson, Adolf Hitler, and Stalin, I find mind-boggling. And especially because,
in other words, even more mind-boggling than my claim that our censorship is as bad as Stalinism.
Yeah, right. But that also speaks to the point. There are so many ways for me to get my voice out, even if, let's use an extreme example, I'm banned completely from the internet. I can still get on the phone with you or, some other attorney and get my message out there. So it's become almost literally impossible to completely censor ideas. And when you are building a narrative that is based on half-truths at best, it's just a house of cards. So I am very hopeful for the future of this country. Here's another great example. I'm not a fan of the police, to put it mildly. I have never.
It's ironic though, because they love you. I hear them talk about you all the time.
They do like me though. That's what's weird. I was in Greenpoint, and I get out of the train, and this cop stops me. And he goes, Michael Malice, I'm a big fan. I'm like, but you're a cop. He's like, yeah, I know, but blah, 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 blah. And I'm just like, all right, buddy, whatever.
I believe it.
Oh, he wasn't the first. He wasn't the first. The point is, there are so many mechanisms for us to be able to make ideas heard that I don't really see that we're in the weaker position. I think a lot of what you and I would correctly regard as oppression is there simply as the result of inertia and, historical reasons, as opposed to if someone came forward and put the idea forth today, they'd be laughed out of town.
And not only that, two things. One is that the more they seek to shut down the discussion, the more frightened. No, we're not there yet. The more frightened they are.
Yeah.
And why are they frightened? Because their hold on power is actually far more tenuous than everyone seems to think. They're afraid of exactly. You see me Twitter. They're afraid. Twitter fears. I said whenever some tweet or some idea or something gets banned, Twitter, Fido, Lassie. They're afraid. They're afraid, and fear is not something that the powerful, that the truly powerful experience.
Yeah, and I would say to everyone who's a parent, which I'm not, you try to control that 4-year-old, right? Good luck with that, and that's a one-on-one relationship where you have all the cards. Now, when you're an elite, which is, let's suppose 1 million people, let's steel man this argument. Let's suppose that there's 1 million people who work for the state, or maybe it's 10 million. You have 10 versus 350. The only way I've made this point on other shows, people insist that this is Orwellian and that it's 1984. I always make the point that it's closer to Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. They manipulate not through force, but through pleasure and training you since you're a kid in government schools to behave a certain way. And once that's pulled away, they have to resort to the hard authoritarianism, but that is very, very expensive and very hard to implement. And I don't mean expensive just financially. I mean in terms of psychologically, emotionally, efficacy.
They spent a tremendous amount of equity on COVID.
Oh, yeah.
And the cost, they lost so many true believers.
Oh, yeah.
True. The loyalty of many of them was absolutely confirmed. No question about that.
Sure.
But there are people who never had reason to doubt the government before, and this is true of the election too, who will never trust government again. And that is for an anarchist or libertarian, that's the best possible thing you could hear, because the deference, plain old meat and potato Americans who think of themselves as loyal and law-abiding see things very differently now than they did 18 months ago.
Can I give you I'm going to give you a very dark and depressing example. And one of the reasons why I'm so and you're from Cuba, correct?
My mother's from Cuba, yeah.
Yeah, your ancestry. I was born in the Soviet Union. One of the reasons I am so condemnatory of totalitarian regimes isn't simply because they're pure evil, but because they're so perverted in their incentives. During the 90s, a famine hit North Korea. This was a man-made famine. They refused to allow food in because Kim Jong-il, who is the dear leader, said, if we allow the UN or the US to feed our population, then the government becomes superfluous. So they chose to allow 1 to 2 million of the population to starve because that would otherwise would have been a threat to their a hold on power. What's really, really sick about this is that the honest, decent, trustworthy people were the first ones to starve. The ones who played by the rules, who are like, the government has provided for us all our lives. This is just a speed bump. We have to trust that the food distribution system is just having a hang up. It'll be there tomorrow. We're good people, and the government is going to provide for us and take care of us. They died. It's the thieves, the cynical ones, the ones who are like, this is all crap, I got to look out for number one, who are the ones who made it through that famine. And what we saw last year with COVID is many people who are like, wait, this is being done for the right reasons. Sure, I'm out of work, but I don't want grandma to die. And after a certain point, I have a friend who has a company, and their company is a dog walking company. They lost literally 100% of their business during COVID. And that I can very easily make the case why that had to happen, and so can you. Theoretically, that's a very easy case to make.
Right.
But what they learned when this started, the shutdown started being pulled back, talking to people, that many normies just regarded it as like, oh, your business was destroyed. Well, too bad. And they said to me, I have come to a realization that I have to live in a society where 90% of the population thinks me being sacrificed is perfectly acceptable. And I think when people realize that that's what they're up against, maybe it's not a nice feeling, but in my view, and I'm sure
it's
in
liberating.
Your view, yeah, once you come from a place of truth, like, okay, I can't breathe on the moon. Okay, if I'm going to get to the moon, I have to have mechanisms to provide oxygen for my system. Okay, I live in a country or a world where 90% of people don't care if I die to further their agenda. Now let's take steps from here, because that is the reality, and figure out how to get to a place where I like, as opposed to tilting at windmills, thinking I'm going to persuade those 90% of people that I matter, because even they don't matter to themselves.
Even they don't matter to themselves. And how do we know? Because they roll over.
Yes.
Gladly, proudly.
It's their profile pic.
Right.
It's their boast.
It's really something. I mean, just, we talk a lot about the polarization of our society, but what we're really doing is finding out here who gets it and who doesn't get it.
There's a great quote from Mencken, which I feel like daily now. The average man does not want to be free. He simply wants to be safe. And when you understand, and that's not a bad choice. You know what I mean? Like, if my
it's
choice
entirely
is
rational. Yeah.
Yeah. If I'm free, I'm really going to make bad choices. I don't have the capacity. Like, if I'm not a wine person, you put me in a wine store, I guess I'd go by price, but even then I'm not going to be making good choices, right? I have no other metric, as opposed to I call a sommelier, tell me what to buy, and I just obey orders. That's a perfectly rational choice in that. There's lots of people who are like, I don't want to make these decisions. Just tell me where to go. I'll do my job. I come home. I have a nice house, lovely wife. I have a couple of kids. I watch these, fakakta TV shows. I've done my part and I'm being provided for. That's their bargain.
Guess what?
I think that's, yeah. Go ahead.
You're describing something. Now, talk about censorship. Any bad word you use is nothing compared to what I'm about to say. Feminization of the American male. Women are motivated appropriately, given their roles as bearers and rearers of children, to value security over things such as freedom. And this is the source of lots of marital tension. Or it was, until the men in this country became women. And that's where we are now. And it doesn't even matter that, gosh, the women are voting and look who they would vote for. The men are women. The men are voting like women too. They're offended by the masculinity of Donald Trump. Why does he have to be such a man? I'm not endorsing the some of the more manly aspects of his life story, the serial adultery and that sort of thing. But, for a man to pretend, unless he's, perhaps a clergyman or something, that he is offended by that in the way that a typical, that a wife is going to be offended by that, is a phenomenal societal development. And what we see is this, so many things follow from that. Security also implies, prioritizing security also implies prioritizing conformance, because it's always safer to be one of the pack than to stick out.
Absolutely. And that's why it's really fun on social media sometimes when I find one of these pack animals and I call them out, they to mix metaphors, they void their bowels and release their squid ink and panic, because their bargain was, I'm going to go on here and bleat like all my other fellow tribesmen, whatever tribe they happen to be in. But now that I've been pulled from the pack and I'm against what I perceive to be a predator, I didn't sign up for this and I don't know what to do.
Oh, this is so, Michael, we are such kindred spirits, because sometimes I will look in a thread, an action thread, and look exactly for that guy.
Yeah.
And someone say to me, why are you bothering with this guy? I said, you don't understand. This has nothing to do with this guy.
Right.
I have 130,000 people who are wondering, how do they deal with this guy in their lives? And I happen to have been given by God the gift of beating up, without my hands, beating up people like this and making them show the foolishness of the positions, and not only their positions, but the position they put everyone else in.
But it's also not just foolishness, it's literal mindlessness.
Yeah.
This person got a menu of choices. There's this T-shirt and sign I saw in stores that says, the signs are settled, Black Lives Matter, climate change is real, and there's like a bunch of talking points.
Yeah.
And people wear these shirts proudly. And I'm like, do you not see anything odd that your entire menu of political choices is verbatim that of every corporation in America? Do you
Not at all.
really think that,
all.
wait a minute, did I make a misstep here somewhere where nothing I say is even slightly one standard deviation from, elevator banter? And they don't ever for a second.
Nope. That's where we are, but that's not what this has been. Not on the ColemanNation. That's why I killed podcasting with the ColemanNation. I culminated.
Oh, ColemanNation! I just got it. Okay.
Oh man, if Michael Malice just got it.
I just got it.
This is terrible. Michael,
it is terrible.
Yeah, but then again, you didn't think about ColemanNation for like more than 2 seconds until about like today. So that's okay. Michael, that's it. It's too long already. Most of the midwits who are listening gave up a long time ago. Your people are going to contact my people. I'll go on the show. We'll have with the makeup and everything. It'll be marvelous. Thank you so much for taking time out. You and I got to hang out more, and I can't wait to hear about your new book and and announce our eventual engagement.
I hear wedding bells.
All right, buddy. Thanks for everything.
Thank you.
Hey, thank you for listening to the ColemanNation podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app. If you like the show, please rate it 5 stars and leave a review. For more information, please visit the show's website at coleman-nation.com. That's coleman-nation.com. Or you can visit my blog at likelihoodofconfusion.com. Join us next time on the ColemanNation podcast and have a great day.